Okay, let's begin our deep dive today. We're starting with something pretty critical, really cuts to the heart of democracy in India. We're looking at Bihar, specifically the voter roll revision process there. There's this new special intensive revision, the SIR, from the Election Commission, the ECI, and, well, it's causing some serious concern. What's the immediate problem people are facing?
Yeah, it's quite something. What's really striking first off is just the sheer scale of the potential impact. We're talking hundreds of thousands of citizens in Bihar possibly losing their right to vote. And crucially, it's not because they're ineligible. The article points to what it calls onerous, shifting, and arbitrary burdens that the ECI has imposed.
Onerous and arbitrary, okay.
Exactly. And there's a draft rule due out August 1st, 2025. That gives the administration a really, really tight time frame for this kind of massive exercise. It immediately makes you question the integrity of the whole thing.
And it gets particularly complex when you look at the actual rules, right?
Mm-mm.
The ECI's notification from June 24th lists 11 types of proof you can use. Okay, fine. But what's missing is, well, really common stuff like Aadhaar cards, ration cards, even driver's licenses. And get this, even the elector's photo identity cards,
Yeah.
the EPIC cards that the ECI itself issues, they're not on the list.
It seems bizarre, doesn't it?
It does. And then there's this other distinction they're making between voters added before 2003 and after. People added after 2003 suddenly have to prove their eligibility all over again.
Mm.
What does this actually mean for, just an ordinary person trying to vote?
Well, if you connect this to the bigger picture, the constitutional picture, it seems to fly in the face of some fundamental principles. Take Article 14, the right to equality. That requires any classification, any division of people to be intelligible, make sense, and be rationally related to the objective. But these new classifications, excluding the ECI's own EPIC card but accepting a school-leaving certificate, the article argues, and it seems reasonable, that this looks arbitrary. And the burden inevitably falls hardest on the most marginalized, economically disadvantaged. It just makes it harder, more costly for them to participate.
So it increases the barrier to entry, essentially.
Precisely. And the Supreme Court actually weighed in on July 10th. They seemed perplexed, frankly, by why these common documents were excluded. They asked the ECI to, and this word is key, consider accepting Aadhaar, APIC, and ration cards.
Considered. That sounds non-committal.
Exactly. It leaves a lot of ambiguity. What this really highlights, I think, is how bureaucratic hurdles, even seemingly small ones, can effectively become tools for, well, selective disenfranchisement. It subtly chips away at that core democratic idea of universal suffrage that India has historically upheld, the presumption that people belong on the rolls.
Okay, so quite a concerning situation there. Let's shift gears now. Moving from democracy to geology, I suppose. Our next deep dive looks at India's seismic vulnerability. This was really brought home by those recent tremors in Delhi, July 10th, 2025. It was only a 4.4 magnitude, thankfully no major damage, but the article we read calls it a definite wake-up call. What did that tremor actually expose?
Well, it really underscored the fragility of Delhi's infrastructure. The article states that over 80% of buildings, especially the ones built before 2000, simply don't meet modern seismic codes.
80%? Wow.
Yeah, it's a huge number. And this isn't just a Delhi problem, it speaks to a much larger issue. India, geographically, sits on one of the world's most active tectonic plates. The Indian plate is constantly drifting north, colliding with the Eurasian plate. That collision is what's forming the Himalayas, and that whole region is, frankly, overdue for what seismologists call a Great Himalayan Earthquake.
Great earthquake.
Magnitude 8 or higher. An event like that could potentially impact over 300 million people. It's a staggering thought.
And specifically for Delhi residents, the implications are pretty stark. The city is in seismic zone 4. That's a high-risk area. You've got, 33.5 million people, over 5,000 high-rise buildings, and as you said, many built without following the proper codes, the IS 1893.2016 code from the Bureau of Indian Standards. What are the real, tangible dangers there?
This really brings up the crucial question of preparedness, or maybe the lack of it. Delhi's rapid urbanization just makes the risk worse, especially since many older buildings are on soil that's prone to liquefaction during a quake.
Liquefaction, right, where the ground basically turns to liquid.
Exactly. Now, there are some tools like the National Center for Seismology's India Quake app, which offers some early warning. But the real problem is enforcement of building codes and, frankly, public awareness. They're just lagging way behind the risk. The article makes an interesting comparison. Bangkok, for instance, managed to lessen earthquake damage by updating and enforcing codes. Myanmar, on the other hand, had codes, but they weren't enforced, and the consequences were much worse.
So knowing the risk isn't enough.
Not at all. The solution, the article argues pretty strongly, is rigorous enforcement of seismic codes. It's about retrofitting older, vulnerable buildings and mandating things like deep pile foundations for all new construction. But this comes at a cost. Experts estimate it needs an annual investment of around 50,000 crore. That's roughly $6 billion every year.
That's a huge figure.
It is, but the article frames it not just as a technical or financial challenge, but as a moral duty, a duty to protect lives and livelihoods in a place facing such a high known risk.
A moral duty. Okay, let's transition again. This next topic is, well, it's a deeply human story, quite a heartbreaking one, actually. It reveals what the article calls a paradoxical situation in India concerning adoption. The core fact is this. For every single child who's legally free for adoption, there are 13 prospective parents waiting, 13 to 1. What does this huge gap really tell us about the system, especially since we know this isn't a new concern? Parliamentary panels, the Supreme Court, they've flagged this before.
Yeah, connecting this to the bigger picture, it really throws a spotlight on a profound systemic failure. The numbers are quite stark. As of mid-July 2025, you have 36,381 aspiring parents registered with CARI, that's the Central Adoption Resource Authority. But on the other side, only 2,652 children are legally cleared for adoption, just over 2,500.
That number seems incredibly low.
It does, especially when you consider a 2020 report, the World Orphan Report, estimated something like 3.1 crore, 31 million orphan children in India. Now, obviously, not all orphans are adoptable, but the disparity is vast, and the consequence. The average waiting time for parents to get a referral has now stretched to about 3.5 years. It really makes you ask. The Juvenile Justice Act of 2021 has time-bound procedures for declaring kids legally free for adoption. Why aren't they working effectively?
Right, that's the key question. And here's where it gets, I think, even more puzzling.
Yeah.
You look at the child care institutions, the CCIs. There are over 22,000 children living in these institutions. That's more than 8 times the number legally free for adoption. So why aren't more of these children being made available for the thousands of waiting parents? What's the bottleneck?
Well, this is where it gets into a really complex kind of gray area. There are multiple challenges. One expert quoted, Smriti Gupta, points out something important. You have children whose parents might visit occasionally but are clearly unfit to care for them, or parents who technically exist on paper. Maybe they abandoned the child but never legally gave up their rights. These situations make it legally difficult to declare a child free.
So legal hurdles, then.
Legal hurdles, yes, but also perhaps a deeper issue. The article suggests the core principle, the idea that every child deserves a family, isn't maybe as strongly embedded or enforced in the system as it should be. This leads to a lack of accountability among the various players and also real resource limitations. And the tragic outcome of these delays falls heavily on the children, especially older children. Currently, about 34%, over a third of the kids in the adoption pool are between 14 and 18.
Teenagers, yeah.
And also children with special needs. Both groups are, unfortunately, less preferred by many prospective Indian parents, so they wait longer or sometimes never find a family.
It's truly heartbreaking.
It really is. It points towards an urgent need, as the article suggests, for a proper audit of why these delays are happening and a much, much stronger focus on actually getting these children into loving, permanent homes. It's a system failing both children and parents.
Okay, now let's take a completely different turn. We're going deep into the universe for this next one, a really mind-bending topic. We're tackling one of the absolute biggest mysteries in physics. Why is our universe full of matter and seemingly almost empty of antimatter, especially when the Big Bang Theory suggests they should have been created in equal amounts?
Well,
What's the new clue that's just come out of the CERN collider?
right, this is fascinating stuff. What's really key here is the first ever observation of something called CP violation, but specifically in baryons.
Okay, baryons. Remind us.
Baryons are the heavy subatomic particles, like the protons and neutrons that make up the nuclei of atoms, the stuff we're mostly made of. Before this, CP violation, which is basically a slight difference in behavior between matter and antimatter, had only been seen in lighter particles called mesons. But this new discovery from the LHCb collaboration at CERN, published in Nature just recently, July 16th, found it in baryons. And this is crucial because, as the lead author Sweating Yang put it, the matter-antimatter asymmetry in the universe requires CP violation in baryons. So finding it is a huge step.
Okay, so finding this asymmetry in the building blocks of matter, the baryons, is a big deal. But let's unpack CP violation itself a bit more. What exactly is it? fundamentally. And how on earth did they manage to measure such a tiny difference? What was it 2.45% isometry at the Large Hadron Collider?
Okay, so CP violation, in simple terms, means the laws of physics aren't exactly symmetrical for matter and antimatter. Imagine you swap a particle with its antiparticle, that's charge conjugation C, and then look at its mirror image, parity inversion P. If the physics looks different after doing both C and P, then CP symmetry is violated.
Right. A subtle difference in the rules.
It's a very subtle difference. The LHCb team looked at the decay of specific baryons, called Booga baryons, and compared how they decayed versus how their antiparticles decayed. They collected just enormous amounts of data from 2011 to 2018. They had to use sophisticated machine learning to sift through the data, make sure they were looking at real decays, and carefully control for any biases in their detector. It was incredibly meticulous work.
And the result was strong enough.
Oh, yes. The result had a statistical significance of 5.2 standard deviations away from zero asymmetry. In particle physics, anything over 5 sigma is considered a definitive discovery, no doubt about it. But here's the thing, connecting it back to the big universal question. While the standard model of particle physics did predict some CP violation in baryons, the amount they've now measured, well, it's still not enough.
Not enough to explain why we have so much matter left over.
Exactly. It doesn't explain the vast imbalance we see in the cosmos. So this raises that exciting, important question again. We probably still need new physics, something beyond our current standard model, to fully solve the matter-antimatter mystery. Still, this discovery is a massive milestone. It fulfills one of the 3 essential conditions, the Sakharov conditions, needed for a matter-dominated universe like ours to even exist. So it's a really critical piece of that huge cosmic puzzle.
Wow. Okay, from the cosmic scale, let's shift gears again. Back down to Earth and to Southeast Asia for a political drama. Thailand's Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra was suspended by the Constitutional Court on July 1st. And apparently it all boils down to a single leak phone call, a 17-minute conversation. What on earth happened in that call to cause such a major political crisis?
Well, what's really fascinating, or perhaps alarming, depending on your perspective, is how seemingly minor details in that call just blew up. The core accusation was that the PM sounded pliant and deferential towards the former Cambodian premier Hun Sen. She even reportedly called him uncle during this call, which was initially set up to discuss a border clash.
Calling him uncle. Okay.
Yeah, maybe sounds trivial, but the really damaging part, according to the article, was when she apparently referred to a Thai military general involved in the situation as an opponent.
Ooh, opponent. In Thailand with its history.
Exactly. In a country like Thailand, with such a sensitive history of border conflicts, especially with Cambodia, and numerous military coups, referring to your own general as an opponent while talking to a foreign leader perceived as an adversary, that was seen as incredibly disparaging to the Thai military. Her defense, the article notes, was that it was just a negotiation tactic trying to build rapport, but clearly that explanation didn't fly and the political fallout was immediate and severe.
So what were those immediate consequences domestically? I mean, suspension is huge, but what else happened?
Well, her largest coalition partner pulled out of the government almost immediately. That left her Pheu Thai party with only a very narrow majority in parliament.
Making it much harder to govern.
Much harder. And predictably, the opposition started demanding fresh elections. On top of all that, the usual rumors of a potential military coup started swirling, which always happens in Thailand during times of political instability. So what does this whole episode really tell us about the power dynamics there?
It seems incredibly fragile. If you put this into the broader regional context, it absolutely highlights the deep-seated political complexities, the historical baggage in that relationship between Thailand and Cambodia. The article even floats the idea, quite interestingly, that Hun Sen himself might have deliberately leaked the call.
Why would he do that?
Well, perhaps to deflect attention from Cambodia's own internal problems like the notorious scam call centers operating there, which he's actually tried to blame on Thailand. It's speculation, of course, but plausible. And this whole situation also has these uncomfortable echoes of Prime Minister Shinawatra's own father, Thaksin Shinawatra. He's currently facing charges back in Thailand for allegedly insulting the monarchy, which, as you know, is an extremely serious offense there, often with political undertones.
Right, the least magis laws.
Oh.
Exactly. So it raises this really important question. Is Hun Sen, a very experienced political operator, intentionally trying to destabilize the Thai government from the outside? Is he leveraging these historical sensitivities, the border friction, Thaksin situation, for his own advantage? It's a complex web.
A very tangled situation indeed. Okay, for our final deep dive today, we're delving into the history and the very meaning of a heavy, disturbing, but absolutely crucial word: genocide.
Mm-hmm.
The article we looked at starts by referencing a recent UN Special Rapporteur's report. It talks about Israel's genocide on the Palestinians and calls for enforcing international law. But let's step back. Where did this specific term, genocide, even originate? Why was it deemed necessary?
Yeah, the origin story is actually quite powerful and, well, tragic. The term genocide itself was coined relatively recently, in 1944, by a Polish Jewish lawyer named Raphael Lemkin. He had been profoundly horrified years earlier by the mass killing of Armenians during World War I. He felt existing international law just didn't have a word for that kind of targeted destruction. Then, tragically, the Holocaust claimed 49 members of his own family.
49. Unimaginable.
Unimaginable. And he famously posed this question, wrestling with the inadequacy of the law. Why was killing 1 million people a less serious crime than killing a single individual? He felt a new term was needed to capture the deliberate destruction of a nation or an ethnic group.
So he coined the word. But how did it then become part of international law? I recall reading it wasn't actually used in the Nuremberg trials against the Nazis, even though Lemkin was advising there. Why not?
That's a really important point. Connecting it to the broader picture of post-war justice at Nuremberg, the focus was on war crimes and crimes against peace. For the atrocities the Nazis committed against their own German citizens, particularly Jews and other minorities, the charge used was crimes against humanity. Both the U.S. and the Soviet Union were apparently wary of the term genocide. Why? Concerns about setting a precedent where international courts could interfere in how a sovereign government treated its own population.
Sovereignty concerns.
Exactly. And think about the context. The U.S. had its own Jim Crow laws at the time. The Soviets had their own internal repressions. So genocide was seen as potentially problematic for them, too. Lemkin was deeply disappointed. He felt crimes against humanity didn't fully capture the specific intent to destroy a particular ethnic or national group, which was central to the Holocaust.
But his efforts continued.
Oh, absolutely. His relentless campaigning eventually led to the UN adopting the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in 1948. That convention defined genocide as requiring both the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, and carrying out specific acts like killing members, causing serious harm, preventing births, etc.
Intent seems like a high bar to prove legally.
It is notoriously difficult. But later international tribunals, like those for Rwanda and Yugoslavia, have clarified that you don't necessarily need explicit proof of orders. A consistent pattern of purposeful action that could only lead to destruction can be enough to infer intent. However, and this is a crucial point the article raises, the 1948 definition has limitations. It still doesn't explicitly recognize the mass murder of social or political groups as genocide, think Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge, nor has it been adequately applied historically to many colonial atrocities.
So gaps remain.
Significant gaps. The article even mentions the forced removal of Aboriginal children in Australia as a practice that continued for decades and is described as barely distinguishable from genocide, yet doesn't fit neatly into the legal definitions categories or hasn't been prosecuted as such.
That brings us to a really profound thought from the philosopher Hannah Arendt. She covered the trial of Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi bureaucrat, and she asked this incredibly provocative question. Does a person have to be evil in order to do evil? What was her conclusion, and what does it mean for us?
Her answer was stark and frankly terrifying.
Yeah.
She argued no. No, a person doesn't have to be inherently evil. All it takes, she argued, is the suspension of thinking. She saw Eichmann not as a monster of deep-seated hatred, but as embodying the banality of evil. He wasn't thinking for himself. He simply followed orders, outsourced his conscience, his morality to the Nazi bureaucracy. He was a functionary.
Banality of evil, just following orders, not thinking.
Exactly. And this failure to think, she believed, wasn't just an individual failing. It could be achieved on a mass scale, often through a deliberate assault on intellectual life, on critical thought, on questioning. When that happens, evil can become mundane, routine, normalized, just part of the job. As another philosopher, Judith Butler, points out, Arndt's critique wasn't just of Eichmann the man, but of the entire historical world in which true thinking was vanishing. And because thinking was vanishing, Butler says, crimes against humanity became increasingly thinkable.
That's a chilling thought.
It is. That degradation of our capacity to think critically, to empathize, to question authority, it works hand in hand with systematic destruction. It makes the unthinkable possible, even commonplace. A profound warning from history.
Thank you for listening. If today's episode gave you something useful, consider following us on Spotify so you're the first to hear the next one. You can give suggestions by contacting on Twitter handle given the episode description. We are always eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.